The world should be more connected than ever. We've got these devices, we've got computers, we've got laptops, we've got iPads. But yet, we always talk about this male loneliness epidemic. I've seen loads of people give their reasons as to why this is happening. Some people blame the patriarchy. Apparently, we created this system that also made us lonely. And in some ways, I've seen some really good arguments as to why that may be true. But more important than the clickbait headlines and all that kind of stuff, we never talk about why this is happening. Why are men so lonely? And what's really taking place? Now, I'm not going to lie. When I hear the loneliness epidemic, the first thing that I kind of jump to is like men that are lonely who can't get girls. I think of men that can't attract a mate, essentially. But that's not always the case. When we talk about male loneliness, we also need to factor in the social aspects, i.e., not having friends. And a lot of men struggle with this, especially in a hyper-connected world where everyone's on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, and X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. People don't connect in the ways they used to, especially when we compare generations such as my dad, granddad, great-granddad, so on and so forth, because times have changed. I'm probably from the last generation where these things weren't in our hand 24/7. When I was younger, you used to knock on my door, get my bike, go ride, get my football, go to the park, we'll all play in the park. Kids don't do that anymore. They can now connect with their gaming headset on and with their PS5 or whatever they're playing, and they're screaming and shouting. I've seen it with my own two eyes, and I know it's happening. To be honest, that is one aspect. Real human connections aren't being built. On top of that, from the data, we know that about 30% of men are sexless within the last year. Now, what it does indicate to some degree is that men are struggling also to find partners, and we know that. But interestingly, when we talk about this loneliness thing, we forget that women are also lonely too. If there's less men available to date, there are aspects of women that are also lonely. And actually, there is data that proves that as well as male loneliness rising, women loneliness has been rising alongside that. Maybe not to the same degree, but it is growing alongside that same aspect. But there's a difference in the way that men and women handle loneliness. Women are more willing to open up about their loneliness. They're more willing to try and get it solved. They're more willing to be proactive in getting it fixed, in addressing it. For example, if you look at data from speed dating events in London, and it is usually about 70 to 80% women that go to these events. Men don't go to these things, and there's a reason why. Some men think it's weak, some men are ashamed, or they're afraid to be perceived as lonely, and some men simply just don't have the confidence. Not even just for these events, but to approach women or to talk to people. There are loads of things that may happen, and it may happen throughout childhood. I was even on a TikTok live the other day, and the guy on the TikTok live was just like, yeah, I tried dating, but girls don't like me. I'm not conventionally good looking. He made like a really, really nihilistic comment about himself, and I was like, this guy needs a dating coach. He needs a dating coach. But it occurred to me at that moment that there are a lot of men that think like that. They're not aware of what they can do, what they can provide. And he was saying he's got a good job, he makes good money. It's not about the money sometimes. And the last real bit here, especially around male friendship, is, there was a study done in the early 90s, and it actually showed that most men could count on at least 1 to 2 real deep friends. Nowadays, there are many men who are even saying they do not even have like one real friend they feel they could call at any time, any moment. And that's pretty sad. The next real issue is something that we do every day. In fact, I done it this morning, and it is scrolling on this bad boy right here. Social media was supposed to have us become more connected than ever. But how true is that? I don't know, because when I think about it and when I really, really assess it, all the hours spent doom scrolling is taken away from the ability to actually connect with other people, whether that's calling your mate, going to see your mate, spending time with your mate, so on and so forth. And a lot of men, they spend so much time on these devices that they don't actually go and do real things. So here's what I suggest. I actually tell people to do this all the time. Number 1, go find yourself a bloody hobby. All men should have a hobby, whether it's painting, dancing, skateboarding, bike riding, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing. Go find a hobby. If your hobby is aligned with something that improves your health and wellness, even better. But go find a hobby, because hobbies is where you can actually find friendship. You can find companionship, because we're all there for a common reason, which is why I'm a big fan of fight gyms. Whether it's jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, kickboxing, boxing, those 4 sports, or MMA, obviously, I really, really recommend to guys, young guys, because you go there, you learn a skill, you learn a self-defense skill. Number 2, it's great for your health and fitness. Number 3, you build a bond with the guys in your gym, even if they don't become your best friends. You've got a group of solid guys that, they train hard, they fight hard, and they're people that, if you got into altercation, they could back you. Not that you should be fighting, but it's a good common ground. And I think there's nothing purer than man-to-man combat. And I think that a lot of men, we enjoy the combat side of things. So for me personally, if I had a son, I'll be enrolling him in jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai 1 or 2 times a week. And then obviously you got your mainstream sports, football, basketball, all that kind of stuff, which I think everyone should do as well, depending on how much time you have. There's only 24 hours in a day. To go back to this device is ruining a lot of people. It ruins relationships and it ruins people, because what they do is they sit there and they scroll 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 and they forget that there's a real world going on around us. So there are a few things you can do on that aspect as well. Is detox. Use apps like Screen Zen, which is what I use to basically block my screen. And every now and then just deactivate for a few days, go live in the real world, do things that don't actually require you to use your phone, and see how far you can get. Because when we're consuming social media, we forget that social media is everyone else's highlights. So if I'm constantly looking at people who are apparently living their best life when they're not, then I'm going to have issues. I'm not going to feel like I'm living my best life, even though the reality is that what people show you on social media are their highlights. We just need to be a bit more aware of this. And I want to just refer back to what I said previously. Everyone's feeling more lonely these days, and certain countries have even deployed what they call ministers of loneliness. I just read somewhere that in Japan, they actually appointed a minister of loneliness. So it's not just a men's thing. It's something that's happening globally, and it's happening in certain countries. And it's not just men. Women are feeling the pinch too. But we go back to how women deal with it. This is how men deal with it. And this is how men are socialized. Man up. Don't cry. Don't share your emotions. Deal with it. You're a big boy. And don't get me wrong, I say these things too, Sometimes I say to people, yo, you got to stop crying, bro. Or you got to toughen up. You got to deal with it. But I think that there is a level of stoicism that men need to have and display. And the only reason I say this is because men are more prone to extreme behaviors. We are more likely to do dangerous things. That's why we lead in almost every single cause of death, because we operate in more polar extremes, whereas women can sometimes be more in the middle. So when we always suggest the guys be more emotional, there's a caveat to that. There can be a drawback to that where they crash out and they do dangerous things, and they do things that we know the unalive rate for men. I don't want to get this video demonetized and all that, but you know what I'm trying to say. So we have to also teach men that there is a level of stoicism that you have to learn. But there's a difference between emotional suppression and emotional processing, okay? And I think that as men, we have to teach other men how to process their emotions, not suppress their emotions. And that's where I personally feel that we are failing, because it's not about making men more emotional. It's about making men learn how to process their emotions a lot better. And I think that's the biggest difference. So what we were taught as young boys, don't cry, man up, deal with it, I get where that came from, but the only issue with that, and I'm with it, because I think boys and men, they need a bit of that tough love, and that I'm with it. But the difference is we need to get to the point where we teach these boys and men as well how to process, not just lock it away, because when you lock it away and it festers and festers, we get crash outs. But when you don't lock it away, it's here, it's present, but I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to process this in a calm, mannered way. I can push through a lot easier. I can get through any emotional turmoil that I feel. So just like I said previously, women are more open with dealing with their loneliness issues. Men need to learn how to process their emotions so they can handle any loneliness issues that they may be facing. And that's probably the biggest difference, or the caveat that we have to face, and as a society. I referenced earlier about how people have said that the patriarchy is what causes loneliness, and the patriarchy is also what built capitalism. I'm not here to tell people what to believe in. We live in a capitalist society. At this point, I don't see it changing in my lifetime. So I'm not sitting there crying about trying to make it change. I'm going to just make it fit me. I'm going to make the most of what society is giving me, because I'm a fatalistic person, and that's just me by nature. I'm sorry. But this leads to another issue. Being poor or being broke makes you more lonely. It makes you more lonely because you can't afford to go on nights out with your friends. You can't afford clothes. You don't even want to go out with your friends. You can't date because you can't afford to date. When you're broke, you are way more lonely because you have less access to doing things. And when you're broke, you probably want to try and work harder. So if you work shift jobs, you want to take on more shifts, which means that you're just working, so you're never with people. And ultimately, if you're working, you're trying to make money, you ain't got enough disposable income to do things, you isolate yourself, but also it eats away at your confidence as a person. And that's just a fact, because you ain't got money. So of course you're not going to be confident. It's just part of the process. I guess the system that men have built, which is capitalism, has also been a driver to the loneliness that we face. And then there's another aspect that we are all aware of, and it is how the media portrays lonely men. We only see lonely men in their absolute extremes. For example, we've got the show Adolescence that went mad this year on Netflix. What do we get? We got a young boy who ends up being, I guess, he ends up being a perpetrator of extreme violence. We get these stories where basically lonely men are generally, again, linked to extreme behaviors, and then they are depicted as monsters. They're depicted as people that don't deserve a place in society. So if you are a lonely guy and you see these monsters and there's something in your life that connects you to that monster, which could just be the loneliness aspect, maybe not the mental health, maybe not all the other side of it, but it could just be that aspect. How do you view yourself now? How do you view yourself now? It's a question you got to ask, because the media paint certain narratives. The media is the strongest thing in the world. It's the most powerful force in the world. But what happens is we don't really look at this. We just see all this stuff about lonely guys and and we look at all these shows and these movies and what happens and the incels and the lone shooters and all that kind of stuff. But we forget about, I guess like the residual effect of that constant viewing. And it's not constant, but it's regular, and how that essentially affects boys and men. Because it does. And I actually think that we're now getting to the point where loneliness is relatively normal for people. It's actually like a normal kind of thing. It's not special. It's not unique, because there's a few reasons. We've got this whole thing of like men need to lock in, and you gotta abandon everything in your life to achieve what you want to achieve. So you just end up being this lonely git who's just trying to achieve, but you don't build any social connections. You don't make any friends. You don't deepen relationships with your current friends or the people that are at least around in your circle. Like, we've got that side of it. We've obviously got the side of men who are just socially ostracized. And because it's become so much more prevalent, being lonely in some aspects is just completely normal. There is nothing unique about it. Everyone is now lonely. There are just so much more lonely guys that it's now become a little bit of the norm, and it shouldn't be, and it's dangerous. So I want to wrap this video up without making it too long. All the studies are going to be left in the comments, and I want to leave you with this. If you have young men or boys in your life, check up on them today just to make sure that they're okay. Peace.